Joining me today
Sasha.
is Mandeep Gosal. You're the Vice President of Global Professional Services at Beazley Security. Mandeep brings nearly 2 decades of experience across leadership, strategic planning, and growth, with a particular focus on building professional services teams and delivering cybersecurity solutions at scale. Before Beazley Security, I did a bit of digging, and you were Director of Professional Services at ITC Secure, where your focus was firmly on sort of transformation initiatives. It's an absolute pleasure to have you with us. What I'd love to do is just kickstart for those that are less aware of Beazley Security, just giving us a sort of overview of what you guys are doing at the moment and the work
Sure.
of Beazley.
Well, thank you for the introduction. Thanks for having me, Sasha. As you sort of brought out in my introduction, in my background, I don't have an insurance background previous to coming to Beazley Security, but for the past 2 years, we've really been living, eating and breathing that kind of intersection of cyber insurance with the cybersecurity world and how we articulate that value to our clients, whether they be Beazley insured clients or they are clients or organisations out there that haven't yet prepared themselves for insurance. That's probably an important sort of demarcation point to make. Beazley Security is a wholly owned subsidiary of Beazley Insurance Group, and our core mission as sort of a cybersecurity company within the insurer is to reduce risk for clients.
Okay.
Whether they be obviously Beazley insured clients, of which there are many globally. We're in the business of making sure they are secure. They've got a solid, responsive, adaptive, preemptive solution in terms of the enhanced value of the insurance product they procured, which goes sort of beyond the risk transfer element of insurance itself. So sort of cyber insurance in 2026 is a very different sort of value proposition to, sort of the cyber insurance of, kind of the last 5 to 10 years. So, those insureds are benefiting from that value. But also Beazley Security's sort of raison d'etre reason for really existing is sort of beyond, the Beazley insureds, kind of organizations out there who are grappling with cybersecurity risk management in general. We can share the insights and sort of the trends and emerging trends that we've got access to and that we've spotted because we're part of the Beazley insurance ecosystem, and we then can share that risk reduction knowledge and consultancy to any clients and organizations out there. So that's kind of a very important point to make in terms of how we engage clients in the market.
It's like a unique place because you've got that security expertise, but then you also have the insights that the insurance companies benefit off in terms of all of that claims data and things like that.
That's correct.
What do you think was the biggest challenge for you moving into the insurance sector as a security expert? Like, what did you find most surprising?
It's happened a couple of times in my career. So I spent the first 12 years or so in telecommunications, where there were a range of 3 to 4 letter acronyms explaining every piece of technology and sort of verbiage in the telecom space. That was a little bit different in cybersecurity. Had their own 3-letter acronyms and sort of that kind of knowledge of that space, and then sort of moving into the insurance space, kind of understanding sort of kind of risk transfer and how brokers are interfacing risk managers. I've been used to talking to CISOs and sort of procurers of security tooling and investments. So yeah, sort of the biggest challenge was just sort of getting up to speed in terms of that kind of insurance nexus.
The jargon.
The jargon, exactly, and just making sure that you can talk the same language when you're sat in the room with a broker or underwriter with a potential client. But then that also presented a huge opportunity in terms of combining the value of what I understood from a cybersecurity universe, sort of reducing risk, with the benefits of the risk transfer part of insurance, which is extremely powerful. And I say it's extremely powerful. I've worked in organizations where, there are threat intelligence capabilities, working with vendors that are, kind of horizon scanning, looking at where the next emerging threats might be, using theoretical risk models. Working as part of an insurance provider, you start to ebb away at some of those risk models and the theory, and you're using evidence of actual incidents, being in the trenches with these clients, Beazley insured policyholders in my instance, who are experiencing the worst days of their professional lives during a ransomware event. And our global teams are helping these clients on a daily basis. So this is real world kind of evidence based interactions with these clients, understanding of vulnerabilities, of risks, how organizations who have a 50 to 100 page incident response plan but perhaps haven't tested that plan are reacting emotionally, professionally, and all of the other kind of adjectives you can think of during these incidents.
Yes, because it's all well and good having the processes in place for the day that does happen. But like you said, it's like the worst day of someone's life. And like, how do they deal under pressure in that environment? What do you think, given just going to your point about how Beasley Securities works with organizations that aren't necessarily on Beasley's book, have you seen a difference between those types of organizations, or is it fairly similar? Like, where does Beasley Security come in and go, okay, this is what you do?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I'll probably answer the question from sort of a geographical lens to start with, and that sometimes determines levels of perception of value of cyber insurance, sort of engaging with cyber insurers, engaging with cybersecurity vendors and providers. I run a global team which has a large US footprint. We do have sort of UK teams, European teams. We do have folks in APAC. The US in general, is a very litigious place.
Yes.
High policy penetration.
Yeah.
So a lot of companies do have cyber insurance, have had cyber insurance for some time, have been benefiting from sort of the services available to them in-house from the likes of Beasley and other carriers who sort of sold them that cyber insurance policy. So in the events of these ransomware incidents, especially in the US, we've seen over the number of years, and still occurs today, they tend to call the lawyer, they tend to call the insurer, and they engage pretty quickly, generally. Sometimes they might have a retained vendor in place, but they tend to engage quite well with the insurance provider. I think they tend to understand, there are additional services available to them.
Culturally, it aligns a bit more closely.
Culturally, it aligns from that kind of litigious perspective I mentioned. They tend to gain privileged advice from legal counsel during that incident. So that kind of that paradigm, that sort of ecosystem of sort of legal counsel, cyber insurance provider, and perhaps having also probably engaged with Beasley Security as part of that provider in proactive risk assessments, in risk management offerings. These are offerings included within the policy as a benefit, tabletop exercises. Reviewing their incident response plan means they probably already have met or engaged with members of the consulting and sort of risk teams within the services organisation, within the insurer. So sort of that kind of element of whether they're Beasley insured or not, we tend to find there's a slightly different motion there.
They're more mature in their posture towards.
Perhaps you could describe it as mature. Then you kind of look at the international market. So again, in sort of insurance language, that's everything outside of the US, as I discovered when I first joined in my first role.
I discovered that. I thought it was so interesting.
Yeah. International, everything outside of the US. So so in the UK and EMEA and beyond, policy penetration is generally a little bit lower. Some large enterprises might self-insure. When I mean large enterprises, very large organizations perhaps can afford to self-insure, or they might have a number of carriers that provide sort of a tower of insurance. So the landscape's a little bit different outside of the US than sort of the level of notifications, sort of request for claim under insurance policy. The volumes are different, so that presents an opportunity to my underwriting colleagues and broker colleagues who can, kind of sell more insurance into that market and provide that value from a risk transfer perspective. But beyond that risk transfer perspective, I engage very regularly with CISOs at roundtables and going out there and talking to CISOs and the buyers of security services out in the market, and the perception of the value of cyber insurance, or what services and insurance together, that intersection is perhaps not as well understood or well perceived. Yeah. So sort of less policy in general, less notifications, late notification we sometimes see, even for policyholders or for those clients that don't have insurance but are sort of reaching out to gain some assistance. Yeah. It might be 6 or 7 weeks into a ransomware incident. Yeah. They've already had their MSP managed service or security provider in there doing some stuff, tinkering around with backups, perhaps not having the full sort of forensic knowledge and understanding or kind of insights that obviously the carrier and the services organisations I described do have and possess. So therefore that kind of success rate of being able to support these clients in other geographical regions where perhaps culturally and from a maturity perspective in terms of value of the perception of the product, isn't as well understood.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you say that, because we have similar discussions as well across that board. And it's also from the carrier perspective, they're more hesitant to get involved and almost like say, we understand and we're confident of the product that we provide. Hey, CISO, this is what's happening. But also on the CISO flip side, their perspective is, I've got this insurance and I don't hear from them afterwards. So where's the value?
Yeah, exactly. And sort of the way we position this, we're educating our broker colleagues, we're educating, CISOs, clients, prospects, is to stop sort of thinking about sort of the cyber insurance product as just risk transfer.
Right.
So, the risk transfer element isn't a replacement for security. Mm-hmm. So, cyber insurance isn't just a compliance tick in the box because your CFO or your CEO, your board is asking you to procure cyber insurance. Whereas shifting perhaps a little bit more to the left, I guess, maybe that's the right way to shift rather than right, which is thinking about cyber insurance and that risk transfer element intersecting with the proactive and preemptive responsive elements of cybersecurity. Mm-hmm. So, security teams are often asking, how can we detect, how can we prevent, how can we stop attacks? Fine, those are good questions, valid questions to ask. The insurers, the carriers are asking, well, what happens if an attack is successful? If you combine the two aspects, then you start to shift the focus towards cyber resilience. Rather than sort of preventing and detecting every single incident. We need to stop every single incident. Maybe starting to recognize and accept that cyber resilience is a better place to shift to, because also these organizations tend to struggle. There's a challenge, even with cyber insurance and services intersecting and all that kind of valuable value, I suppose, if one's a better expression. Organizations still struggle to determine their security decisions and investments and relate that to business outcomes,
right?
Financial impact.
Yeah.
So one of the great values of, Beasley calls it full spectrum cyber, the intersection of cyber insurance with services, is being able to use that claims data. All of those thousands of incidents that our forensics teams, our MDR teams, our research teams, our underwriting claims teams have seen and have witnessed over the past 2 decades, frankly.
Yeah.
And starting to provide that indication to clients proactively on financial outcomes of certain claims, reasons for claims, be it ransomware, business email compromise, third-party risk compromise. So these are real kind of evidence-based incidents that are driving claims, frequency of claims, severity of claims, and services organizations like Beasley Security engaging with those clients to then start informing their decisions on security and linking them to business outcomes. When that linkage starts to happen to business and financial outcome, then the entire kind of thinking around security investment and sort of the job of the CISO when articulating that to the board becomes a very it's not easy, but kind of a more meaningful conversation to have when you're linking security decisions to the security context of the individual organization, their appetite for risk, and engaging with the insurer or Beasley Security, the services organization within these carriers to ask the question. So we're a bank, we're a hospital. What are you seeing? Are you seeing trends in terms of attacks against hospitals, professional services firms, law firms, banks? And the answer is yes. We are seeing those trends because we are supporting those clients across all those verticals on a daily basis.
And are you able to, and I appreciate putting you on the spot here a bit, but are you able to identify with all of that data that you've seen and also speaking with, the heads of InfoSec or CISOs within a smaller organization, what separates an organization that is more resilient and also, to your point, like more the business operations are in better stead than those that maybe aren't and are potentially more vulnerable to an attack? And not just to an attack because an attack may be likely, but like dealing with one should it happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So it stands out very clearly for us in terms of kind of separating out the organizations that respond well and perhaps don't respond as well. Testing the incident response plan. Testing the ability to recover from backups. Backups may exist in the organisation, but are the backups? The question's been asked: are they immutable? Are they kept offline? Are they? Has a business continuity exercise been performed where a business is operationally brought down and falling back to the backup in a test scenario? have the downtime metrics and sort of requirements to get back up on their feet. Those timing metrics being tested out in the field, are they realistic or not? So again, sort of to answer your question directly, those organisations that they have an incident response plan, but they've tested it, and they've engaged with their kind of forensics incident response vendors, whether that be an insurance carrier or a retained vendor, ahead of an incident, so that they can have that dress rehearsal. They can repeat that dress rehearsal, so this isn't sort of a one-time thing, once a year, making sure that there is executive, not only buy-in to those tabletop exercises, but participation.
Yeah.
So pressure testing, not only the plan, the document itself, but pressure testing the board and the C-suite down all the way through to the SOC and technical teams in the same room, perhaps in the same exercise for a half a day, a few hours, or a whole day. That is challenging, to gather those teams.
Get the whole troops together.
Get all the troops together, but we see the value in the resilience capabilities then adopted, and then that are proven by these organisations who carry out these tests, who are doing the business continuity plans, who are testing their recovery expectations, timing metrics, uptime and downtime metrics. Those are the organisations that get back up on their feet faster, and also those organisations that come to the kind of realistic realization that cyber resilience is about it's the inevitable.
Yeah.
These attacks.
Cyber resilience is business resilience now.
Business resilience, absolutely, Sasha. These events, these attacks will happen. You cannot, don't let perfection be the enemy of progress. Yeah. Is what I say to CISOs. So yes, you need. There are much better prevention tools out there. Much better AI-powered, AI-driven everything, detection capabilities, but you can't stop every single attack. And also, are you investing in the areas where are you also testing your resilience and recovery as well as your prevention and detection? Prevention and detection, threat intelligence in combination with recovery is what supports true cyber resilience, business resilience.
It's a really interesting point, because do you think then cyber teams and security teams have evolved in their perspective, moving away from all of my budget will be spent on MFA or scanning tools, moving towards should my budget be spent on sitting down with training teams on how to do it, and not just my team but other teams in terms of how would they react?
It's a great question, and the way I'll answer that question is I think there are green shoots, green signs of things are getting a bit better, because I think generally we're starting to see more boards take cyber risk seriously in the way that it's a business problem. It's a business risk as opposed to the IT team's problem. Or well, we've hired a CISO, so they're managing cybersecurity risk, and on their head be it. So I think the investment in cybersecurity is definitely increasing. I think there is more board support and board acknowledgement that this is a business risk, and we need to tie security investment and challenge the CISO and our business as a whole to help us understand how we link security investments to business outcomes. And full spectrum cyber insurance, the intersection of services with insurance is a very excellent kind of answer to help organisations grapple with that. I do think still, though, there is a lot of work to be done. I think sometimes organisations yet today still do focus a little bit too much on detection and prevention, sort of the tooling. We need to they need to apply MFA as widely as possible, absolutely, especially on kind of overprivileged or privileged identities and access ports. But sometimes there is an overestimation, I think, of actual resilience compared to where the investments have been made. So, we've got great detection and prevention tools. I think we've sort of taken the box for cyber insurance.
I think I pay it once a year. Right.
Which is a reality, honestly, that we come up against. But so sometimes I think there is an overestimation in terms of where those control investments have been made for preventing, detecting, got cyber insurance. Perhaps we reach out and do a risk assessment once a year, or tabletop once a year, or every 2 years, versus how the threat landscape is ever evolving. Which means, and what I mean by that is threat actors and these sort of bad actors are evolving at pace faster than defenders can keep pace with. So we make a little bit of progress. We think we're kind of, we've got more investment, we've got, boards sort of getting on board, kind of recognizing it's a business risk. We're investing more in detection and prevention. I think we've got cyber insurance, but possibly already outdated controls.
Yeah.
So I have to move away from not just having technical controls in place, risk teams worrying about sort of governance and
it's just
compliance.
Exhausting. It's like where does it end? Oh, and now I've also got to look at the whole threat environment and what's a bad actor doing, not just what's internal.
Take a holistic view, right? Okay. So you raise a really good point. It's complicated. Yeah. There's complexity there. The threat actors seem to be, you're hearing, Mandeep saying they're kind of ahead of the game. They're moving at pace faster than defenders, especially with frontier AI and these LLMs and all of the capabilities that they're going to and are already starting to bring both offensively and defensively. I can talk a little bit about the efficacy asymmetry. It's a bit of a mouthful between AI used in offense and AI used in defense. Essentially, the advantage is weighted with the offenders at the moment because they don't really care if the LLM hallucinates 20% of the time.
They're not looking like the business operation element of AI. Correct. Is that what you mean?
Absolutely spot on. So if they're getting in 80% of the time, then that's fine. Yeah. But from a defensive perspective, if the organisation is taking defensive actions based on agents or AI, and there is still a hallucination rate of 15 to 20%, that can create chaos with an organisation. Right. Perhaps keep them on the back foot. So there are green shoots of optimism, but I think that holistic approach, that complexity that you just sort of spotted, the good news is there are organisations and services organisations that exist within insurance carriers that have sort of started to get a good grip of solving the opportunity that insurance and services, that intersection brings. So then, a lot of organisations that have already got cyber insurance, for example, or are looking to procure cyber insurance, or not quite ready with cyber insurance, but still would like to get the advice from an organisation such as BZ Security or others that exist within carriers. The good news is they can just reach out and ask the question. How do we take that holistic approach? How do we make sure that we're not just, how do we break down those silos between that's the biggest challenge, even with all the kind of the valuable insights of all of these organizations, is technology teams do tend to get kind of focused on technology controls. Yeah. And they have the ear, obviously, of the board now because the board's a little bit more interested. They realize, this is a business problem, and also from a regulatory and compliance perspective, there are much bigger fines and kind of punitive measures coming into place. With
Whereas
a lot
the
of
insurance sector sees like the overall risk profile of that organisation. So it's like, how do you merge everyone together? I think what I'd love to discuss as well is sort of what do you see the role of the broker in that whole value chain? As you've mentioned, like it's about improving the communication and also like the work of the like cybersecurity sector, the risk and government sector, obviously the insurance sector. Where does the broker sit within that? And do you think there needs to be, improved education from a carrier to a broker or from BZ Security to a broker? What's your thoughts?
Yeah. So with brokers, I mean, they don't need to be a CISO. They don't need to understand every technical control. But I think the biggest challenge and opportunity for brokers, especially in this sort of softer market we've been finding ourselves in, is being able to articulate the value proposition of the detection, prevention, and responsive element of the cyber insurance product which they're trying to place on behalf of clients, which is kind of that's exactly what brokers are doing. They're kind of focused on the cyber insurance cyber insurance lens for clients, but having that intersection value of preventative, preemptive, tabletop exercises, reviewing the incident response plan, providing cyber insight sessions, creating security roadmaps for organisations.
It's not a bog standard policy of it's not like getting travel insurance and signing it and saying, oh, well, I'll be good if anything bad happens. But it's actually holding the hat, cyber insurance now holds the hand of the organisation or the security team. And
you'll notice I was sort of quite intentional about some of the services I listed off there, not getting too technical.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think we're trying to move from sort of just, in the underwriting application, obviously the underwriter has that responsibility to fill out that application. The broker plays a part. Yes, MFA is good. MFA needs to be deployed. yes, it's almost table stakes that XDR, EDR, endpoint detection, managed extended detection response, MXDR solutions, full monitoring, full MFA of privileged accounts or as wide as possible need to be in place. And I think that, brokers are fairly comfortable with those sort of acronyms, those sort of technologies. But security risk assessments, dress rehearsal during a tabletop exercise, building muscle memory in the event of an incident, having a panel of vendors to provide forensics and data recovery support to reduce the time to recovery and obviously size of claim and so on and so forth, and also having access to threat intelligence teams such as BZ Security has its own dedicated research labs team that have inserted themselves into the dark web and these forums where they're sitting sort of opaquely alongside kind of threat actors, bad actors, and they're learning, they're kind of understanding where the next threats are coming from, and the next
seeing the
vulnerabilities.
behavior patterns of those actors.
How quickly are these threat actors harnessing the use of AI, for example, in these models to increase the speed at which they're deploying ransomware and other payloads.
And how do they use that? How do you then sort of reuse that information and knowledge? Is that on the advisory side or also like more technical, like security products?
Both, actually. Yeah. So BZ Security and other services companies have essentially built platforms which are then provided to clients who take them on and provide them continual monitoring of their environments for MXDR. We'll also be able to help them get some grip over their external exposures. So exposure management is a really important topic, and it allows organizations to get a grip of their internet-facing infrastructure vulnerabilities.
Okay.
And why that's so important today, I mean, it's not sort of a new thing that's sort of just come about, is if you look at these sort of the investments in research and development of AI models, really they are, they're kind of taking web applications and automating the penetration test or the exploitability of these bugs they're finding in applications on the internet.
Okay.
So organizations are internet connected to the teeth, so they need to get a better understanding pretty quickly of their internet facing exposure management. And once they've got an understanding of where those vulnerabilities lie for a web application or some other application that sits on the internet, then they can understand whether they can be exploited by these bad actors. And that's sort of driven through these platforms that providers provide, MXDR, exposure management, third-party risk management. And that starts to provide visibility to those clients in terms of where the key vulnerabilities are that they need to go and sort of remediate, rather than sort of playing whack-a-mole and trying to sort of understand based on static CVSS scores where the vulnerabilities lie.
Okay. And then so going back to that sort of like dual perspective that Beazley has now, do you couple that data and information that a security platform would have with like claims data? Like do they often go hand in hand? Do you find they often contradict one another? Because surely there's quite a lot of threat intel and breaches that you see that actually don't end up in a loss scenario because they've got the right processes in place to stop it. What do you find that there's more of a positive combination or conflict ever?
Not really a conflict. It's sort of just bringing back to your first question. So there are these platforms that provide visibility of internet-facing exposure or kind of identities, cloud infrastructure, etc. That is then blended with the claims data and sort of the knowledge gleaned by our forensics teams who are dealing with thousands of incidents, our cyber services teams who are also working with other forensics providers. So there's all this sort of knowledge and information about verticals, about vulnerabilities, which is then integrated with the research that our research teams are, sitting alongside these threat actors. They're in the dark web. They're spotting the next kind of vulnerabilities, and they are providing sort of a dynamic risk score view of combining the claims data with the kind of research and advisories from the labs teams with actual kind of metadata from client environments where we've deployed MXDR. So all this organization is brought together and then put into meaningful advisories for clients. And what I mean by that is we might have a private hospital in the United States that's a client of BZ Securities. We then noticed that the healthcare sector over the last 6 months to a year or so has been There are certain vulnerabilities in their legacy IT environments that have been targeted by threat actor group X, Y, and Z, specific named threat actor groups who just have a tendency at MO to unfortunately go after these hospitals, which is actually one of the verticals where we've seen a lot of claims, unfortunately, in higher education and also in private in
Is that
in
because
hospitals.
of sort of like the personal data that they hold is of interest, or
It's a combination of things. So in terms of the healthcare vertical, they often have legacy IT infrastructure, sort of overworked, under-resourced security teams, and there's a sort of a kinetic impact to a cyber attack, whereas sort of the end patient, the sort of an individual's health is at the end of that kind of chain, which could be impacted by an MRI scanner being brought down. So it's pretty nasty stuff. So based on that, based on the kind of the high target value for these ransomware groups, that's kind of why we've drawn a correlation as to why we're seen healthcare, but also higher education, where again you've got thousands of students on a college campus, university campus, all internet connected using the universities.
It's like how hurtful and damaging can I be? In
High value, high value targets, and also by the very nature of the business. So most people that work in a hospital are in the business of taking care of patient care, looking after patients, and the sort of commensurate proportional size of an IT team or a security teams, kind of working within a hospital environment are not kind of they're not proportional if you think about the number of doctors and nurses there are looking after patients. So therefore,
do you think they've kept up? Sorry to interrupt. Yes. Do you think they've kept up with the increased potential vulnerability and targeting towards healthcare companies or education? Have you seen a shift in growing those IT teams or growing that security posture, or is it still slightly far behind because their main priority is predominantly looking at the patients that they work with and the technological developments to support healthcare and things like that?
I think some of the same challenges do exist for whether it be a hospital or a college, university or school. I think these are not the only two, but two key, very important, verticals where we are still seeing a lot of claims activity and incident activity, unfortunately. I think things are starting to improve whereby they will engage with security firms and understand that they need to do more where they can, to make sure that their IT and security teams have either outsourced to a provider where they can gain third-party help, to a managed security services provider, or a combination of with insurance, as I was describing. But also at the same time, one of the challenges, like many organisations around the world are grappling with, are the utility and benefit of the use of AI. With the security risk that AI brings, that paradigm. So especially for hospitals, if you think about, I'm certainly no expert in sort of, kind of patient care, but oncology, with sort of cancer rate detection, some really fascinating, interesting research at the moment in terms of, use of these models for early detection of all kinds of, cancers, which is incredible. And then use of these models and tools within the hospital environment to provide a better, obviously better patient experience. But then at the same time, these models and these agents, if used, are exponentially, and I don't think that's a dramatic term to use, increasing the attack surface in these organisations. The way to think about
balancing what's the cost and benefit of that. Yeah,
and I think a lot of organisations, again, it's kind of the new paradigm that they're underestimating is, yes, the benefits of agents and AI and kind of all the hype around AI. So kind of we need to do something with AI, we need to harness the benefits of. But it's back to almost like the kind of traditional visibility. What are these agents doing in our organisation? How is our data hygiene looking? Have we labelled and classified, the data within our organisation, which is something organisations, have been looking at for, decades. So these aren't sort of new controls or processes they need to think about. It's just making sure they sort of go back and look at data hygiene, They make sure from a responsive perspective, again, are they testing their incident response plan?
Yeah.
Are they kind of engaging with their forensics provider? Are they running these tabletop exercises? So, but the good news also is there are a lot of interesting organisations out there who are developing solutions to help with the visibility of the security risk of AI models and agents.
So it's the acceptance of people are going to increasingly implement AI tools and AI systems into their company. So how can you then grow alongside that in terms of improving your security?
That's the kind of, I think, almost the healthy tension that needs to exist in organisations to sort of create that balance. But it's not an easy balance to achieve, but ask the right questions.
I'm assuming some sectors will be further ahead in that than others, depending on how dependent they are on those tools.
So sectors where we're seeing, generally that seem to be a little bit ahead, even with or without AI, are financial services organisations, heavily regulated industries, and kind of ICT, sort of industrial control systems, or whether there's critical national infrastructure. We're seeing compliance is driving a little bit of that demand.
Okay.
We've got the new UK Cyber Security and Resilience Act, which is just passing through Parliament and will come into legislation, I think, later this year. We have sort of legislation in the EU. We've got NIS2 and DORA within the EU.
Yeah.
We've got the California Consumer Protection Act and other acts within the US. So some compliance plays a role, and they are tightening up the requirements on critical national infrastructure firms, which play, a key role in national economies, and so the operational kind of survival of these states. So the reporting obligations have increased, I think, under the new Cyber Resilience Act. Within 24 hours, there has to be notification of a potential incident, and I think within 72 hours, a full report, or at least a full-bodied kind of interim report of the incident itself. Which is a lot more stringent than GDPR. I think 72 hours you had sort of time to report the incident, not sort of provide a full report. And also the punitive measures on directors and officers and the boards are also increasing. So compliance plays a role there. But I think also, having these sorts of conversations, having roundtables, kind of engaging with your insurance provider, engaging with your cybersecurity provider to sort of ask the question, how can we achieve that balance of technical controls, prevention, detection, but recovery? How do we strive closer to cyber resilience?
Yeah, to
within
your
our
point, moving
organisations?
away from the silos and engaging with each other more, even if the language isn't the same. How do you find a joint language that everyone can align with?
Absolutely. We've sort of coined it within this full spectrum approach within Beazley, which is under 3 pillars: preemptive, adaptive, and responsive.
Okay.
This is really the encapsulation, I think, of what we see as the evolution of that intersection of insurance and services. Preemptive is, again, the risk assessments, the tabletop exercises, engaging on understanding how the claims data and those thousands of incidents, that insight and that knowledge can inform business outcomes and financial outcomes based on the security investments you're making. The responsive element is having a full stack global access to these global organisations that can be ready within minutes to support you when the worst does happen. And I pick my words carefully there. It's inevitable.
Yeah.
Eventually, most organisations will be experiencing a cyber incident. How well do they respond? How well versed are they? Practiced? Have they done those dress rehearsals? Do they have that muscle memory so they can kind of kick into action and the board knows what to do? The SOC knows what they're doing. They're in the right positions at the right time, and they know how to engage that kind of third-party help, the incident response teams, legal counsel, PR, crisis management, and they understand the next steps in that flow. And the adaptive element is having access to threat intelligence, to research labs teams that are horizon scanning and understanding when these frontier AI models, these 0 days that we hear about with the advent of Mythos and Anthropic and all these models, when is that going to start becoming kind of an issue? And I think the answer to that is now. And how do organisations respond to that? So having that adaptive capability, the responsive capability, pure cyber resilience, and also preemptive is really what the intersection is of cyber insurance and cyber services.
Back to the holistic element of the whole thing. And then I guess what I'd love to know more, and I know our audience would as well, is looking at the insured side of things. So whether that's the CISOs that you're speaking to, or there might be, I'm assuming there's some organizations that don't necessarily have like a really experienced security team. what surprises you the most in terms of like blind spots that exist? I know we've slightly touched on it in terms of education and, teaching the whole team what you do in an incident example. But is there anything else that has maybe even when you've come into the room surprised them about looking at it from that sort of integration of cybersecurity and cyber insurance?
I think because there's been this sort of traditional really big focus on security teams, on detection and prevention. We need to sort of see everything and sort of stop everything in the first party within their enterprise. I think oftentimes they sort of don't realise even some assets that they own that they don't realise that they own. That sounds a bit crazy.
Yeah.
But we've had conversations with organisations where they forgot about a data centre, or they didn't realise there were certain applications sitting in their internet-facing environment that they hadn't discovered, they were not aware of.
Maybe they bought years and years and years ago that are still integrated in there.
Absolutely.
It's kind of terrifying.
Yeah, so these sort of assets that exist within their enterprise that they've forgotten about or didn't have any awareness about, because honestly they're not scanning their internet-facing exposures, their external exposures I mentioned. Over-permissioned accounts.
Okay. By that you mean?
So whether that be human identities, so sort of people, employees, staff that have had sort of elevated access to certain resources within the organisation, but perhaps that individual left the organisation. They moved on, or they no longer require that level of elevated privilege because they've moved roles or they've changed jobs, etc. Sort of join a leave a mover, JML sort of process. So there's over-permissioned identities, human identities, but also non-human identities. So these service accounts we hear about. So these are sort of accounts that exist between sort of machines and infrastructure that also require credentials to access or API tokens to access certain resources but aren't a human. They also have permissions to go and do certain things within organisations. So oftentimes, security teams or IT teams or CISOs, if an organisation can afford one, are caught a little bit blind. And not, when we've run our exposure management scan, or we've run our security posture report for them, and they sort of start to see these assets that we've discovered that they didn't know existed or they forgot about, or they didn't realise had a security risk scoring that's quite high relative to what they were perceiving, these over-permissioned accounts. And also, I think, an underestimation of, or sort of the perception of how they're managing third-party risk.
Yes, that's what I was going to say next.
Being a compliance challenge as opposed to an operational risk management problem.
Yeah. And do you think when let's say a company is onboarding a vendor, then I'm guessing they have to do not just internal scanning, but then scanning of that company and what do they abide by, and how do you constantly stay on top of that? Because surely they have to track every time something changes within that third party, how that then impacts their current organization. Like, I guess my question would be, what does like a robust approach to that look like?
So I think as it stands today, I think one of the biggest challenges with third-party risk management is reliance on an annual questionnaire.
Okay.
Which is obviously a static thing. It's not run frequently enough. It's probably redundant or outdated, within a few weeks, being frankly honest. Not perhaps then, being able to prioritize or understand, which of these suppliers that we've kind of got a questionnaire against. Perhaps there's 100. Perhaps there's even 1,000 questionnaires that have been accumulated over the course of 12 months, depends how large the organisation is. It's very much sort of a compliance approach to viewing third-party risk. But then once the answers have been retrieved for X number of third parties, how is that that priority context applied, risk scoring applied?
Yeah.
You kind of need a little bit of a different solution to that problem.
Because there's no it's a tick box exercise. You don't know if they then implement any of the changes or
not. Perhaps going back into those. I mean, where do you start? You haven't prioritized? You haven't picked your top 5 or your top 10? And if you have decided to go down do the exercise of prioritization, what are you applying? Is that business criticality? You rely on those suppliers for certain operational requirements. Financially, you couldn't survive without those suppliers, or perhaps they are the riskiest from a security perspective. But have you even determined that? You're not scanning their internet-facing exposure. So I think sort of best practice looks like starting to think about how you prioritize your top suppliers from a security perspective. What are those guardrails in terms of security that you would expect, your security teams would expect, your business would expect, based on the context of your business, which is different for every business.
Yeah.
It's not a sort of a one-size-fits-all rule. And then start to deploy a solution which can provide you a view of that third party, that supplier's exposure. So I talked a little bit about exposure management and sort of that internet-facing vulnerability. So for the first party, the organization itself, but then extending that exposure management scanning for the third parties or the list of the top 5, or the top 3 or the top 10, based on the dependence on the organization to operate, based on those suppliers, based on the security scoring that's been perhaps applied by the solution that the organizations look to deploy to start to automate. You've got to apply some level of automation within your ability to manage third-party risk and exposures. Otherwise, security teams are just going to get quickly overwhelmed.
Yeah.
So again, provide, kind of integrating that exposure management first party, but also third party, then starting to understand sort of fourth and nth party risks. And this is where it starts to get a little bit complicated, but just starting with sort of first party and third party exposure management, prioritization of those suppliers that provide, the biggest impact, business impact to the organization, going back and then sort of maybe even thinking about, okay, for the top 2 or 3 suppliers that have the highest risk score based on the exposures that we're now monitoring with an automated solution, are we going, what do we understand what their obligations are to us contractually? And how often should we be auditing them, asking them the question about their security controls based on what we're detecting through the exposures we're monitoring of their environments?
It's all well and good having a great security posture yourself, but if no one you work with does, then you're still at risk of being breached in some way, shape, or form and not being able to respond to it.
Yeah, and exactly that. And a lot of organizations don't realize that they can start to gain visibility of at least the internet-facing vulnerabilities or exposure of their supply chain.
Without them necessarily having to share anything.
They don't have to go and wait for the questionnaire. They don't have to engage with their internal security team at the third party to go through this kind of lengthy kind of Q&A exercise. They can start to gain visibility to enhance that resilience I talked about by employing a third-party risk management solution which provides the exposure visibility of those third parties in a prioritized way. And then taking that to the next level, I guess the next step would be then, again, partnering with a provider or an insurance carrier that has a services organization that can integrate claims data and vulnerability insights and per vertical based on the third parties that they're monitoring in the same platform. So that's when you start to really bring, put kind of powerful insights into the hands of those security teams when they're starting to consider third-party risk management.
And I'm assuming those companies that you have advised and supported in that, there's a massive difference in terms of how much more resilient they are. And then to then follow up, if they didn't have cyber insurance in the first place, they would have a much better policy in place and much better acceptance rate as well. Yeah.
So those organizations that have started to ask those questions or have deployed exposure management and third-party risk monitoring of their top 5, top 10, or X number of suppliers that make a difference to them, that we're starting to see when we engage with them in tabletop exercises or when they're undertaking their own crisis simulations with their boards, they're starting to update their incident response plans to include the insights that they're gaining from these third-party risk management solutions, which obviously means, perhaps not obviously, but I should articulate that. We're starting to see that those are the types of organisations that respond better.
Yeah.
So again, I choose my words intentionally. It doesn't mean that they do not suffer an attack, but when the inevitable happens, they are responding much more resiliently.
Yeah.
They have a much, they're much more better versed in terms of how they respond themselves, how they, are sort of understanding what the vulnerabilities are from the third parties, which may have been a vector for the entry point for the attack. And perhaps they might have closed that kind of back door with that particular supplier, which meant that wasn't an entry vector for them.
Yeah.
So we're starting to see this sort of, less anecdotal and more evidence-based data that's supporting this best practice in terms of how to manage third-party risk and exposures and exposure management as a whole.
Well, hopefully that continues to grow and then everyone will be in a much better position. Mandeep, I want to close on one final question. We ask pretty much everyone that sits down with us this to some extent, depending on what lens they're looking at the cyber risk sector. If you could put one, and please feel free to say two, there is no rules on that, one piece of advice out there, and I particularly want to ask you in terms of to both a CISO or a risk manager or a cyber underwriter, given how you're looking at the sector at the moment, whether that's from a threat intelligence point of view or like maturing security posture, what do you think people should be talking about or listening to most when it comes to improving their cyber resilience?
It's a great question. And sometimes it's hard to put your finger on one thing.
Yes, appreciate that. There's probably and you're like, well, actually, you should also add this one to it.
No, but I think it's a good challenge. I think I go back to that. I think I go back to that sort of saying, which I think I stole from somewhere. But I'd say to the security teams, the CISO, the information, the IT team, don't let perfection in terms of preventing every incident get in the way of progress or resilience. So really make sure that the security investments, the security decisions you and your organisation are making are informed decisions on the basis of also, testing your recovery capabilities as well as your detection and prevention capabilities. So with brokers, albeit underwriters or CISOs, or colleagues within our teams, these are the things we're thinking about on a daily basis. I think, kind of the best answer to that question is those organisations that fare best or will fare best with this evolving threat landscape are those that are focused on detection, prevention, and response to build cyber resilience within their organisations. Being informed on what the financial and business outcomes are that are linked to those security decisions. That's what supports and creates the best environment for cyber resilience, which ultimately means this threat landscape, we're seeing will evolve again in 6 to 12 months' time. Yeah. Those are the organisations that will, kind of stand the best chance of recovering well. Yeah, and potentially a bold statement for me to make, but you might always be behind, but you want to be the closest behind you can be every time it keeps changing. That's a good way to put it. Yeah. Mandeep, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Really enjoyed our chat. Really appreciate it. Likewise. Thank you.